Hi, I'm meteorologist Tom Atkins. Welcome to the 2021 Spring Severe Weather Special. As always, we've got great topics for you. My topic is forensic meteorology. That's when we reconstruct past weather events, write reports. Sometimes they end up in the insurance or the legal system.
I'm meteorologist Craig Flint. Weather and your health, aches and pains. Is there a correlation? Well, we catch up with an expert to find out the answer.
I'm meteorologist Tom DeVecchio, and we'll be discussing some tornado myths.
First up is meteorologist Tom DeVecchio. He's got a topic that's very relevant to all of us. Questions and answers about tornado myths.
Since the first tornado project in 1948, we have learned so much about these destructive storms. But as is always the case, some myths have developed along with the truths about tornadoes. And today, we're going to look at some of those myths, including how the tornadoes form, where they form, and what to do when a tornado is approaching your area. Let's take a look at some of the more common tornado myths that you may have heard in the past.
Is it true that tornadoes only form in certain parts of the country?
That is true. Most of the tornadoes indeed form in what we call Tornado Alley. That's roughly what this line is here, this area around the red line. And the reason that the Midwest is the center point for these tornadoes is that's when you have the best clash of colder air from the north and the warmer, humid air from the south, and they clash here usually in this area. But that's not the only places where we have clashes. Anytime you have the clash of moisture from the south and the cold air to the north, sometimes it can be here in the Tennessee Valley. They've had their share certainly so far this spring. But if this happens even in the eastern Great Lakes, if you have a good clash of that cooler air to the north and the warmer and more humid air from the south, that is where you're going to have the best chances of seeing the possibility of severe weather. So yes, the Midwest is the primo area for tornadoes, but any place that you have a clash of the cold air and the warm air, that's where you can have the chances of getting severe weather and tornadoes.
Is it true that we always get hail before a tornado strikes?
That's not necessarily the case. Now, it is true that hail is indeed an indicator of the severity of a thunderstorm, but in over half the cases, hail never occurred before the tornado formed.
Only the large tornadoes cause destruction, right?
That's not necessarily true. Now, many well-constructed buildings can certainly survive an EF0 to an EF2 tornado, but it doesn't mean that they can't experience some serious damage. Recall the recent damage of a nursing home in Conneautville a few years back. That EF2 tornado caused some serious damage.
I heard a tornado sounds like a freight train is coming.
That's not always true. Now, yes, some of the larger tornadoes do have a rumble or a sound of a freight train, but the sound of a tornado is determined by not only how big it is, but its proximity to you and what kind of terrain features are around you as the tornado approaches. Take a listen to some of these tornado sounds. As you can hear, a tornado can have any variety of sounds as it approaches you.
Is it true that you should open windows when a tornado is approaching?
This was a common practice back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. The theory was that when a tornado passed over a building, the outside pressure would quickly drop, and inside pressure would literally cause a building to explode. So the theory was if you opened up the windows, it would help equalize the pressure and help the building survive. But we know today that that is not the case, and that the destruction of the building is due to the strength of the winds of a tornado. Tornadoes are serious business, and you should take them seriously if they are approaching. And of course, separating the fact from fiction will help keep you safe and make sure you do the right thing when a tornado warning is issued. And as always, you can count on the Jet 24 Fox 66 weather team to keep you safe this storm season.
One of our viewers, Jay, asked me the question, do tornadoes ever hit Erie? And yes, they do. If you remember back to November of 2017, a low-end tornado came down in Mill Creek along with a downburst and moved eastward into the city of Erie. Other data shows that back in the 1950s, there was a small tornado that hit the Little Italy section of West Erie. So yes, tornadoes do hit Erie. They don't care what's on the ground. The lake usually doesn't protect us, and certainly being in a city, that was a myth as well. Tornadoes do hit cities, including Erie.
You're watching the Spring Severe Weather Special.
Welcome back. You know, we use a lot of technology to try and make a forecast, but some people can feel a weather change in their bones. Meteorologist Craig Flint talked to local health expert Debbie D'Angelo.
We look at a ton of data. We have a bunch of computers that we use to predict the weather, but some people claim they can predict the weather just by the way they feel. Achy knees, migraines, and chronic pain. Well, we're talking about weather and aches and pains, and who better to talk to about it than our very own Debbie D'Angelo, registered nurse and health coach for us here, part of the Jet 24 family. You hear a lot about, oh, my knee hurts or my shoulder's hurting, and a lot of people relate that to the weather. Is that true?
Actually, it is. And I remember as a teenager, my grandmother would say, Debbie, I think it's going to rain today because my joints ache. And she was correct. I mean, she was pretty accurate. But unfortunately, until recently, there really hasn't been a lot of scientific research to back that up. The results have been mixed, probably because the study population was small and they didn't, monitor it for a long period of time. Up until the landmark British study that's titled Cloudy with a Chance of Pain. And I think that was a bit of a game changer.
So there are, in fact, recent studies that can prove this, that can prove that weather does have an impact on how you feel, your overall health, your aches and pains.
Cloudy with a Chance of Pain was landmark in that it was the first study of its kind to utilize smartphone technology to track weather conditions and people's levels of pain. So they followed 13,000 people for 15 months. And what they found was pain sufferers were 20% more likely to experience more pain under weather conditions like a decrease in the barometric pressure, an increase in humidity, or even strong gusty winds.
Really?
So that was a major study that really validated patients' experiences. There have also been studies that correlate pain to precipitation and then the speed at which the weather changes. So how rapidly those conditions change rather than specifically a certain weather parameter. Mm-hmm. In fact, with barometric pressure, it's usually a drop in barometric pressure or something that's sudden. So it's not always, say, the barometric pressure or the humidity or the temperature, it's how quickly it changes. And it can be different for everybody.
When the weather is about to change, it seems like the arthritis in my legs flare up.
For me, I usually get a headache. It can be just cloudy day, but it can rain too.
It starts with my knees and my shoulders, my wrists, my fingers.
Somebody might get migraines when the barometric pressure drops. Someone with arthritis might find that when the pressure drops, their swelling in their joints increases and the thickness of the fluid in their joint increases and makes those joints feel stiffer. Somebody else with fibromyalgia might find that under windy conditions or high humidity, they feel worse. So everybody's a little bit different. And that's where you have to look at it and say, okay, what are my triggers and what's my plan going to be? How am I going to manage my pain?
When the barometric pressure shifts very drastically, usually then that's when my flare-ups get the most intense and most unbearable. And usually it doesn't matter which way it's going. If it's a hard shift, I can feel it.
What can people do to kind of ease the burden, I guess?
Well, the bad news about the weather is it's not a modifiable risk factor. So, for example, if you have migraines and you find that a decrease in the barometric pressure is your trigger, what can you do to control the weather? You can't. But you can have a plan so that you can mitigate some of those circumstances and make it work for you a little bit. So what I would say to people is, first of all, identify whether or not weather is a trigger for you. And if it is, which conditions. So log that in, log how your pain feels, the temperature, the humidity, the wind speed, precipitation, all those kinds of things, until you can identify really what bothers you and aggravates the pain. And then secondly, what's your plan going to be? How are you going to prepare? And for a lot of people that might mean following your weather report and 24 to 48 hours out saying, okay, what's going to be happening in the upcoming couple of days? Is there a front coming through? Does that mean I might have to change my pain medicine or take it preventatively? Does that mean I might have to adjust my schedule so that I'm not overburdened and stressed? Because that also contributes to pain. And what you want to do is place your body in the best condition it can be in order to deal with it.
When we look at these levels of pain, are you noticing any time of year specifically where this pain might be a little bit more accentuated or a little worse?
No, actually with pain, because it's related to weather conditions, it might be more of a factor of where you live, how temperate or how moderate is the weather versus a lot of variability. But spring, summer, winter, fall, those weather changes occur. So people get to know pretty quickly what periods of time and they feel worse, and what might affect them. People who have pain can usually predict the weather, unfortunately better than you, Craig. They might just put you out of a job.
And of course, our thanks to Debbie D'Angelo for her always excellent advice. And if you were ever wondering, hey, does the weather have something to do with how I'm feeling? Yeah, it does. Now, we still encourage you to watch us, and we will continue to work hard to provide you with the most accurate and dependable forecast as we head through the spring and summer season.
You're watching the Spring Severe Weather Special.
Welcome back. We're going to talk about a subject that we haven't talked about on past severe weather shows, and that is forensic meteorology. Tom Atkins hooked up with some local experts to learn more about the subject.
We're here with attorney Andy Cicini. We're talking forensic meteorology, and we want to find out from a legal standpoint maybe a couple of the cases and what it all entails being a lawyer.
Sure, Tom. It's quite frequent that weather factors into a lot of the cases that I typically handle. I handle a lot of motor vehicle accidents, bodily injury claims, slip and fall claims, things like that, and even other cases that have nothing to do with auto accidents or anything, and weather typically factors into most of those cases. In slip and fall cases, and I've actually used you a couple of times as my weather expert, there's a doctrine under Pennsylvania law that's called the Hills and Ridges Doctrine, which basically means that if somebody slips and falls, and they slip and fall on black ice, unremediated, just black ice, you really can't sue the landowner for that type of condition. What you need to be successful in a lawsuit for slip and fall injuries is to establish that there's hills and ridges on the sidewalk or in the parking lot. What the heck are hills and ridges? Well, basically it shows that there was either snow or ice accumulation, and then there may have been a little thaw, and then there may have been a refreeze maybe at night. So a lot of times we'll have snow, the sun will melt it a little bit during the day, and it gets real cold at night and it'll refreeze, and it actually makes, well, you'll see footprints sometimes in the sidewalk, but you'll see bumps in the sidewalk or in the parking lot, and that shows that there has been foot traffic typically there, and that the either parking lot or the sidewalk have not been properly cleared or remediated with salt or whatever. Sometimes I would have you check all the meteorological data, and you would give me breakdowns every 15 minutes. We had freezing rain at 6 a.m. At 6:30 it turned to snow. At 6:45 it was flurries. And you've done that several times for me in certain cases, and you break it down usually in, I think, 15-minute intervals. And so that's when we can show where the accumulation was, and then we figure out what time the slip and fall accident happened. A lot of time it's on surveillance cameras, which really helps with that timetable. And then we put the two together and try to establish a case.
What's the role of a meteorologist in this whole scheme of things as far as reports or potential testimony is concerned?
You have to be a qualified expert in order to testify. Somebody like yourself with your degrees and your experience, you've been qualified as an expert in cases for me. We have to actually bring in an expert who pulls all the climatological data and then breaks it down, and then we have to submit your credentials as well. And then we ultimately have to qualify you as an expert. And sometimes the other side might object, not in your case, but to somebody else, in which case the judge has to make the call as to whether or not the judge believes that we have established you as a credible expert in the field of meteorology or climatological data. Yeah, a few years back, I'm going to say 2 years ago, may have been 3, I had been contacted by the owner of a car dealership because we had had a huge hailstorm, more so south of Erie, in the Waterford, Summit, Edinburgh type areas. And there was incredible amount of property damage to many new vehicles and many used vehicles on this dealership's multiple lots. Now, they never retained me because they were able to settle the situation with the insurance company. But the big issue is, was there coverage for this type of incredibly damaging hail?
We just talked to attorney Andrew Cicini. Now we're up here with insurance agent Bob LaFaro to talk about insurance coverage and the impact severe storms can have on it. What do you recommend as far as hail insurance for this area?
So hail's the basic coverage. You know, your coverages your most preliminary coverage is fire, and then lightning, and then following that shortly thereafter is your wind and hail. So if you've got a basic policy, unless it's just for fire, most likely you're going to have coverage for hail. Now, if you get into maybe a southern state, there might be a different situation. Like in Florida, you have your wind pools where insurance companies actually carve out the coverage for wind. But in this area, and even your basic coverage includes that.
And you also mentioned lightning and wind as well as hail is in most basic coverages?
That's right. And some people, there's a common fallacy that tornado is treated separately. It is not. So wind would include tornado, hurricane, any kind of wind damage that would fall under wind. Now again, you have situations where they're considered wind pools. Like in different areas, if you have a high frequency, you may be dealing with separate deductibles, a product that treats it a little differently. But other than it being carved out, and you're not going to find that in this area, you're included. It's included.
It's good to know that a basic policy covers most severe weather damage in this area. I worked on a case that involved fire destroying a home, and it was all determined by wind direction at the time. But sometimes you may have to step it up into the legal system for some extra help, and that's where forensic meteorology can come in.
You're watching the Spring Severe Weather Special.
And welcome back. So arguably, two of the most common phrases we use as meteorologists are watch and warning. So what exactly are they? So watch versus a warning. It's important to know the difference, and it's something that you will hear frequently as we head into the summer months. So what is a watch? Well, quite simply, that just means we're watching it. You should just go about your daily activities and just keep in the back of your mind that there is a potential for some strong or severe weather later in that day. Warning, that is your call to action. A warning is definitely more important. That is when you should be seeking shelter because severe weather is occurring right now or will be shortly. So have a plan in place, and if you hear the word warning, you need to take the proper precautions and get yourself to safety.
Other terms that cause confusion are waterspout and tornado. Typically, a tornado forms from a strong thunderstorm where the funnel comes from the cloud and goes toward the ground. Waterspouts occur when very cold air passes over a warmer body of water. The heat from that water comes up and goes into a spinning motion that turns into a waterspout. Tornadoes tend to be stronger than waterspouts.
And speaking of tornadoes, let's talk about Mr. Tornado. This is a man by the name of Dr. Ted Fujita, who found out after surviving the A-bomb in Hiroshima in 1945 that tornado damage looked similar to the damage pattern of an atomic bomb. So he emigrated to the University of Chicago and studied tornadoes intensely. He invented what's called the Fujita scale. That was in 1971. You're looking at an F4 tornado. This was north of Korea on that outbreak, May 31st, 1988. And then they came up with the enhanced Fujita scale that we use today. Dr. Ted Fujita, Mr. Tornado. Thanks so much for joining us for our spring severe weather special. Thanks to my excellent team, meteorologists Tom DeVecchio and Craig Flint. Of course, we're here for you and to protect you, your loved ones, and your properties. So if you have any questions, feel free to email us or Facebook message us. Other than that, join us throughout the spring and summer on Jet, Fox, and YourErie.com.